The morning sunlight spilled gently across the windows of the small elementary school, filling the classrooms with a golden warmth. Children carried their backpacks inside, their voices echoing in the hallways, mixing laughter, whispers, and the sound of footsteps on the polished floor. It was a special day for the school, though most of the students did not yet realize it. Today, the CEO of a major company was coming to visit. The staff had prepared for weeks. Posters were hung on the walls. The floors were scrubbed until they gleamed, and even the garden outside had been given extra attention. The teachers told the students that someone important was coming, someone who had built a company from the ground up, and who wanted to talk about creativity and problem solving. The children were curious, but they didn't really know what it meant. To them, it was just an exciting change from the usual routine. In one classroom, a little girl sat at her desk with her hands folded neatly on top. She had been looking forward to this day, though not because of the visitor. For her, the best part was that her father would be at the school all day. He worked there as the janitor, and though he often kept to himself, she felt comfort knowing he was nearby. When she felt nervous, just seeing him walking down the hallway with his mop and bucket gave her courage. Her father was already at work that morning, quietly wiping down the glass doors at the entrance. His uniform was simple, his shoes worn from long hours, and his hands showed the marks of years of hard labor. Yet there was a calmness about him, the kind of peace that comes from being proud of honest work. Other parents might not have noticed him, or perhaps they looked past him, but to his daughter he was the strongest and smartest man in the world. The CEO's arrival caused a buzz of excitement. A sleek black car pulled up in front of the school, and teachers hurried to greet her. She was tall, dressed sharply, and carried herself with confidence. When she stepped inside, her presence seemed to fill the hallway. She smiled warmly at the children, shaking hands with staff and offering words of encouragement. But behind her smile was a sharp mind, always observing, always searching for talent and potential in places others might miss. The principal led her into the classroom where the students were waiting. They had been given a challenge earlier, a puzzle that even some of the teachers found tricky. The CEO had suggested it herself, saying she wanted to see how young minds approached problems when given little guidance. The puzzle involved arranging a set of shapes into a larger figure, something that required not only patience but also a sense of strategy. The students bent over their desks, their brows furrowed in concentration. Some shuffled the pieces aimlessly, others gave up after a few attempts, and a few managed to form small parts of the solution. The CEO walked between the rows, watching closely, nodding with interest at their different methods. She stopped now and then to ask a gentle question, encouraging them to think deeper. And then her eyes fell on the little girl in the corner. Unlike the others, she was not rushing or getting frustrated. She studied the pieces carefully, tilting her head as if she could see the answer in her mind before it was complete. With calm hands, she began fitting the shapes together, one after another, until the entire puzzle was solved. The classroom grew quiet. The teacher gasped softly, surprised at how quickly the girl had done it. Even the other children stared, some with admiration, some with disbelief. The CEO crouched down beside the little girl's desk, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "That was incredible," she said softly. "Who taught you this method?" The little girl's face lit up, not with pride for herself, but with the kind of joy that comes from sharing something special. She didn't hesitate. She lifted her small hand and pointed toward the back of the room, where her father stood holding his mop. At first, there was silence. The teacher glanced at the janitor, unsure if the girl was joking. The CEO followed her gaze, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly, then softening with intrigue. The man shifted uncomfortably under the sudden attention, his grip tightening on the handle of his mop. The girl's voice broke the silence, steady and innocent. "My dad taught me. He shows me puzzles at home. We practiced together." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Some children whispered to each other. Some teachers raised their brows. The CEO, however, did not look away. She studied the janitor with new interest, the question still echoing in her mind. How could a man who spent his days cleaning floors and fixing broken chairs teach a child such advanced problem-solving skills? The janitor looked down, almost embarrassed. He had never wanted attention. For him, teaching his daughter was private, something he did quietly at the kitchen table after dinner. He never expected anyone to notice, let alone someone as important as a CEO. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of a classroom, his daughter proudly pointing at him as the source of her cleverness. The CEO smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed locked on him. She wasn't just impressed, she was deeply moved. In that simple gesture, the little girl had revealed something extraordinary. The janitor cleared his throat softly, lowering his gaze again. He wanted to disappear back into the quiet corners of the school where no one noticed him. But the look in his daughter's eyes kept him rooted to the spot. She was proud of him, and in that moment that mattered more than his own discomfort. The CEO straightened, her mind already racing with thoughts, but she didn't say anything just yet. She wanted to hear more, to understand how such brilliance could come from such an unexpected place. The rest of the class continued, but the air had shifted. The other children kept sneaking glances at the little girl, and some even tried to mimic her method, though none could match her calm confidence. The teacher, still amazed, tried to keep order while the CEO silently observed. The janitor, meanwhile, returned to his quiet corner, his mop resting in the bucket. He pretended to focus on his work, but inside his heart was heavy with emotions he couldn't quite name: pride, humility, and a deep love for the daughter who believed in him without question. That single moment, her finger pointing toward him, would stay with him for the rest of his life. It was simple yet powerful. He had no title, no wealth, no recognition. But to his daughter, he was her teacher, her guide, her hero. And now, for the first time, someone else had seen it too. The CEO left the classroom later with a thoughtful expression, but her mind kept returning to the same question. Not about the puzzle, not about the girl, but about the man in the janitor's uniform who had quietly passed on his knowledge without expecting anything in return. It was only the beginning of a story that none of them could have predicted. The school bell rang for lunch, and children rushed into the hallways, their voices filling the air with laughter and chatter. Some carried lunchboxes from home, others lined up for trays in the cafeteria. The classroom that had been so tense just moments ago now echoed with the playful noise of children being children. But for one little girl, the memory of solving the puzzle still glowed warmly in her heart. More than the puzzle itself, it was the way her father had been noticed. She sat with her lunch, glancing out the window where she knew he would be walking, pushing his cart of cleaning supplies. He always worked through lunch, quietly mopping spills or emptying bins while everyone else rested. She wanted to run to him, to tell him how proud she was that she could point at him in front of everyone. To her, it was the most natural thing. She never thought of him as just the janitor. To her, he was the one who made the broken seam whole, who could explain hard things in simple ways, and who always made time to teach her even after long hours of work. The CEO, meanwhile, was walking with the principal down the hallway, discussing the morning session. Her mind, however, was not on the polite conversation. She kept thinking about the girl's quick mind, her clever method, and most of all, the man she had pointed to, a janitor teaching puzzles and problem-solving. It wasn't something one heard every day. In her world, skills like that usually came from expensive tutors, private schools, or books that only a few people could afford. She stopped for a moment near the cafeteria, her eyes catching sight of the janitor himself. He was on his knees, fixing the loose leg of a bench while children ate lunch nearby. He worked with quiet focus, using a simple tool set that had clearly been patched and reused many times. His movements were steady and careful, as if even the smallest repair deserved patience. She found herself watching longer than she intended. The principal noticed her pause and spoke gently. "He's one of our best," she said. "Always early, always reliable. Never complains, never asks for more. The children adore him, especially his daughter." The CEO nodded slowly, her thoughts still circling. She wasn't just impressed, she was curious. What kind of man with such a humble position could pass on skills that made a child stand out in front of a whole classroom? At that same moment, the little girl spotted her father across the cafeteria and skipped over, her small steps filled with excitement. "Papa?" she called softly, not wanting to disturb others. He looked up, surprised but pleased, and set aside his tools. She leaned close and whispered, "She asked me who taught me, and I told her it was you. Everyone looked at you." For a second, his face showed a flicker of embarrassment. His instinct was to avoid attention, not invite it. But then he saw the pride in her eyes, the way she glowed when she spoke of him, and he couldn't help but smile. He brushed a stray curl from her forehead and said gently, "You did well." Always remember it's not about being fastest, it's about being thoughtful. That's what matters. The CEO, standing nearby with the principal, caught part of their conversation. She was struck by the tenderness in his tone, the way he spoke to his daughter not as a child, but as someone capable of deep thought. It was rare. She had met many people in powerful positions who couldn't speak to their children with such patience. The principal excused herself to check on another classroom, leaving the CEO alone for a moment. She walked slowly toward the janitor and the girl. The man stood quickly, wiping his hands on his uniform, clearly uneasy at being approached by someone of her stature. "I saw your daughter solve the puzzle today," the CEO said, her voice calm but full of genuine interest. "She used a method I've seen very few children her age even attempt." "She said you taught her?" The man shifted, glancing at his daughter, then back at the CEO. His voice was low but steady. "Yes, ma'am. We practice at home. Just small games. I want her to see the world like a set of problems she can solve, not walls she can't climb." The CEO tilted her head, intrigued by his choice of words. "That's a powerful way to think. Where did you learn to teach her like that?" He hesitated, then answered with honesty. "From books I borrow, puzzles I collect, things I find. I didn't have the chance to study much when I was young. But I always liked to learn, and I didn't want her to grow up without that. So when I finish work, we sit at the table and go through problems. Sometimes I make them up. Sometimes she finds new answers I never thought of." The girl's eyes sparkled as she added quickly, "He makes it fun. Sometimes he draws the shapes on cardboard when we don't have real puzzles. Or he uses coins and buttons. He says you don't need fancy things to think. You just need patience." The CEO couldn't help but smile. There was something deeply moving about this picture. A father tired from work, still finding ways to turn coins and cardboard into lessons of logic and resilience. She glanced around at the children in the cafeteria, many of them glued to tablets or phones, and then back at the girl who had learned creativity from the simplest of tools. The janitor, noticing her silence, lowered his eyes. "I don't mean to boast," he murmured. "It's just something we do together. She's bright. I just try to keep up with her." But the CEO didn't see it as boasting at all. She saw a rare kind of wisdom, the kind that didn't come from degrees or titles, but from love, patience, and a desire to give a child more than what you had. Their conversation was cut short as the bell rang again, signaling the end of lunch. Children scrambled out of the cafeteria, their voices rising in excitement about recess. The girl hugged her father quickly before heading back with her class. The janitor returned to his tools, though his mind was now restless. The CEO walked slowly behind the students, her thoughts heavier than before. She had spent her life building a company that valued innovation, creativity, and bold ideas. She had traveled the world meeting inventors, leaders, and thinkers. And yet here in a small school cafeteria, she had found something just as powerful, an overlooked man with calloused hands, passing down lessons to his daughter in ways that no classroom could replicate. As the afternoon wore on, she continued her planned visit, speaking in classrooms and answering questions from children about her company and her life. She told them about challenges she had faced, about moments when she nearly gave up, and about the importance of never stopping learning. But as she spoke, she kept noticing the little girl in the crowd, her attentive eyes bright, her posture confident. When the day finally ended, parents began arriving to collect their children. The CEO prepared to leave, but she paused by the main doors. The janitor was there again, quietly sweeping the floor near the entrance. His daughter came running, clutching her backpack, and he bent to take her hand. It was such a simple image, yet to the CEO it seemed profound. She found herself saying, almost to herself, "The world needs more fathers like that." No one heard her except the principal, who gave a knowing nod. But inside, the CEO felt something stirring. She had come to the school to inspire children. Instead, she had been inspired herself. The black car pulled up once again, and the driver opened the door for her. She stepped inside, but as the car drove away, her eyes lingered on the small figure of the janitor walking hand in hand with his daughter down the sidewalk. She had seen something rare that day, proof that brilliance doesn't always wear a suit, and wisdom can live quietly in the most unexpected places. The day was over, but the story between them was just beginning. The next morning began like any other. The little girl woke before sunrise, as she always did, to the sound of her father moving about in the small apartment they shared. Their home was modest. 2 rooms, a worn couch, and a kitchen table that had seen countless evenings of study and laughter. Though the place was simple, she never saw it that way. To her, it was the most magical place in the world, because it was where her father turned ordinary nights into adventures of numbers, shapes, and stories. She rubbed her eyes and shuffled to the kitchen where he was already packing her lunch. He always tried to slip in something special, even if it was just an apple cut into a star shape or a sandwich folded neatly to look like a little puzzle. She grinned, hugging him tightly around the waist. "Papa, yesterday was the best," she whispered. He paused, glancing down at her bright face. "The best?" he asked with a smile. "Yes," she said quickly. "Everyone saw you. The lady asked who taught me, and I told her it was you. They all looked at you like you were important." His smile faded into something gentler, quieter. He kissed the top of her head and said, "I don't need anyone else to see me. You see me. That's enough." But deep inside, her words stirred something in him. For years he had lived in the shadows, unnoticed except when a floor shined or a trash bin was emptied. To be seen through his daughter's eyes in front of others had touched a place in his heart he had long kept hidden. That day at school, the CEO had returned, this time unannounced. She claimed it was to follow up on her charity program, but in truth she couldn't shake the memory of the janitor and his daughter. Something about them kept tugging at her thoughts. She wanted to understand more, not just about the girl's cleverness, but about the man who had quietly shaped her mind. She asked the principal if she might spend a little more time observing classes, and though the principal was surprised, she welcomed the idea. As the CEO moved through the school, she noticed the janitor again and again. He was everywhere, fixing a squeaky door, tightening a loose screw, sweeping dust from the corners. He moved with a kind of rhythm, never hurried but never idle. The children greeted him warmly, calling out small hellos, and he answered each one with kindness. Later that afternoon, while the children were outside playing, the CEO found herself standing near the back of the school, watching him repair a broken swing. He worked with careful hands, his daughter standing nearby, handing him tools one by one. It was clear this was their routine, a quiet teamwork built from years of trust. Finally, she spoke, surprising both of them. "You seem to fix everything around here," she said. He straightened quickly, wiping his hands on his uniform again. "I do what I can," he replied softly. "And your daughter helps," she added, nodding toward the little girl who beamed proudly. "Yes," he said, glancing at her with warmth. "She likes to be part of things. I tell her, even if you can't do everything, you can always do something." The CEO tilted her head, intrigued by his words. "That's a wise lesson. Where did you learn it?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "From life. I grew up with very little. My parents worked hard, but there wasn't much left for learning or dreaming. I wanted to go to school longer, but I had to work instead. Even so, I never stopped learning. Books, puzzles, anything I could get my hands on. When she was born, I promised myself she would have what I didn't. If I couldn't give her money, I could give her knowledge. And knowledge lasts longer than anything else." The CEO felt a lump in her throat at his quiet confession. She had met countless people in boardrooms who spoke of vision and ambition, but none had spoken of it this way, with humility, with sacrifice, with love at its center. The little girl tugged at her father's sleeve. "Papa makes me puzzles from cardboard," she said proudly. "We use coins, buttons, even bottle caps. He says you can turn anything into a lesson if you try." The CEO smiled at her, then back at her father. She saw now what she had only guessed before. Brilliance was not limited to boardrooms or offices. Sometimes it lived quietly in small homes, carried in the hands of men no one noticed. That evening, after the school day ended, the janitor and his daughter walked home together, hand in hand. Their apartment was a long walk from the school, but neither minded. Along the way, he always found small ways to teach her, counting the steps between streetlights, guessing the weight of a stone, or telling her stories about the stars as they appeared overhead. Every moment was a lesson, woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Back at the apartment, he made a simple dinner while she set the table. Afterward, they cleared the dishes and settled at the worn wooden table with a box of puzzles and scraps of paper. Tonight, he drew a grid on a piece of cardboard and cut shapes from old cereal boxes. He handed her the pieces with a smile. "Let's see if you can make a square," he said. She frowned playfully, studying the pieces, then began moving them around. He watched with pride, not because she would solve it, but because of the way she approached it, with patience, with curiosity, with courage. That was what he wanted most for her, more than any answer, the spirit to face problems with an open mind. While she worked, he thought about the day, about the CEO's eyes when she listened to him, about the way she seemed genuinely interested. It unsettled him. He wasn't used to being noticed, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be. Attention could bring trouble or expectations he couldn't meet. Yet a part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, something good could come from it. The girl solved the puzzle at last, clapping her hands with delight. "I did it, Papa!" she shouted. He laughed softly, leaning back in his chair. "Of course you did. You always do." She tilted her head curiously. "Why do you always say that?" "Because," he said, his eyes gentle, "you don't give up. And as long as you don't give up, you'll always find a way." She thought about that, her small face serious for a moment, then nodded firmly. "Then I'll never give up." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with love. To him, she was the reason he worked so hard, the reason he endured long hours and tired nights. Every sacrifice was worth it if it meant she would grow up believing in herself. Meanwhile, across the city, the CEO sat in her quiet office, the skyline glowing outside her window. She had met hundreds of people that week, investors, partners, advisors, but it was the janitor and his daughter who filled her thoughts. She kept remembering the way he spoke of turning bottle caps into lessons, the way his daughter looked at him with unshakable pride. She realized something that unsettled her. For all her success, for all her power, she had never seen learning expressed so simply, so purely. It wasn't about resources or connections. It was about heart. And she couldn't help but wonder what might happen if such wisdom were given a wider stage. She leaned back in her chair, whispering almost to herself, "The world overlooks people like him, but maybe it shouldn't." Her words lingered in the air, a quiet truth she couldn't ignore. Back in the small apartment, the janitor tucked his daughter into bed. She curled up with her blanket, her eyes heavy with sleep, but before drifting off, she whispered, "Papa, one day, will everyone know how smart you are?" He sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair back gently. His voice was soft, filled with love. "It doesn't matter if they do. As long as you know, that's enough." But as he watched her eyes close, he admitted to himself, just for a moment, that it would be nice, just once, for the world to see him the way she did. And though he didn't know it yet, the world was about to. The next week at school began like any other. Children ran through the hallways, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Teachers hurried to their classrooms, and the janitor quietly carried his cart down the corridor, as he always did. To most, it was just another morning. But for the little girl and her father, the memory of what had happened days earlier still lingered like a soft light. She kept replaying it in her mind, that moment when she had pointed at him, proud to tell the world that he was her teacher. Her father tried to put it aside. Life was not about being noticed, he told himself. Life was about work done well, about doing the things no one else wanted to do, and still taking pride in them. Still, every time he thought of her small voice, saying, My dad taught me," his chest tightened with feelings he couldn't quite name. The CEO had not forgotten either. She carried that moment with her into her meetings, her travels, her late nights in the office. Again and again, she thought about the janitor who had taught his daughter lessons from scraps of cardboard and coins. The thought humbled her, and it stirred something in her. She had spent years searching for clever minds and new ideas, yet here was a man who had been overlooked, unseen by the world, but who had managed to pass on wisdom that could not be bought. One afternoon she returned to the school, this time not with an entourage or cameras, but quietly, almost as if she wanted to keep the visit to herself. She asked the principal if she could see the janitor privately. The request surprised the principal, but she nodded and went to find him. He appeared in the small office doorway a few minutes later, looking uneasy, his hand still holding the rag he had been using to polish the railings. He wasn't sure why someone so important would ask to see him. The CEO stood, offering a smile that was warm but serious. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this is unexpected." He nodded slowly, not meeting her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "Please," she said gently. "Sit." He hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair across from her. She studied him for a moment, noticing again the quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. "I've been thinking about your daughter," she began, "and about you. The way she solved that puzzle, the way she spoke about you, it hasn't left my mind." He shifted, uncomfortable with praise. "She's the clever one," he said softly. I just try to guide her." "But that's exactly why I wanted to speak with you," she replied. "Most parents want the best for their children, but not every parent finds ways to give it, especially with so little to work with. You've done something remarkable, and I don't think it should be hidden in the shadows." He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of work. "I'm just the janitor," he murmured. "No one needs to hear about me." She leaned forward, her voice firmer now. "Titles don't define wisdom. I've met people in boardrooms who couldn't teach what you've taught your daughter. What you've done, turning small, ordinary things into lessons, making knowledge out of scraps, that is rare, and it deserves to be recognized." He swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Recognition was not something he had ever asked for. His whole life had been about working quietly, unnoticed. Yet the thought of being acknowledged, not for himself but for what he had tried to give his daughter, stirred something deep inside. "Why me?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because," the CEO said softly, "your story shows that brilliance isn't limited to wealth or status. It shows that love and patience can create something extraordinary. The world needs to see that. Children need to see that. Parents need to see that." There was silence between them. He thought of his daughter, asleep at night with her puzzles beside her bed, her small fingers tracing shapes he had cut from cardboard. He thought of how she always looked at him as if he could do anything, even when he knew he couldn't. Maybe this wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about her. "What would you want from me?" he asked cautiously. The CEO smiled faintly. "Nothing more than what you already do. I want to share your story. I want people to know how you've taught your daughter. And perhaps with your permission, I'd like you to help us create something for other children. Something simple, but powerful, like the lessons you give her." His breath caught. The thought frightened him. Standing in front of others, speaking, sharing, it was so far from the life he knew. Yet he could see in her eyes that she was serious, that she believed in him in a way few ever had. "I'll think about it," he said quietly. "That's all I ask," she replied. When he left the office, he felt a weight on his shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was possibility. He had never thought of himself as a man with something to give the world. He only wanted to give his daughter hope. And yet maybe giving her hope was giving the world something too. That evening he told his daughter about the meeting as they walked home. She listened intently, her small hand gripping his tightly. "Papa," she said with excitement, "if you teach other kids too, they'll know what I know. They'll know puzzles can be fun and coins can be games and cardboard can be shapes. Everyone will love it." He chuckled softly. "It's not that simple," he said. "Yes, it is," she insisted. "You always tell me, if you can explain something in a simple way, then you really understand it. You can do it." Her faith in him was like a light he couldn't ignore. The following week, the CEO arranged a small gathering at the school. No reporters, no large crowd, just a group of teachers, parents, and children. She asked the janitor if he would share one of his lessons with the kids. He nearly refused. But his daughter begged him with such shining eyes that he couldn't say no. Standing in front of the group, he felt his knees tremble. But then he saw his daughter sitting in the front row, watching him with the same pride she had shown the day she solved the puzzle. He took a deep breath, reached into a bag, and pulled out a handful of coins, buttons, and cutout shapes from cardboard. "Today," he said softly, "I want to show you that learning doesn't need anything fancy. You can use what's around you. These are just buttons. But together, we can turn them into something more. The children leaned forward, curious. He laid out the buttons, arranging them into patterns. He asked questions, invited them to move the pieces to try different ways. Slowly, the room filled with laughter, with hands reaching out, with young voices shouting answers. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just the man who cleaned the floors. He was the man who made children believe they could solve anything with what they had. The CEO stood at the back watching, her heart full. This was what she had hoped for. This was why she had returned. She knew now that the world needed to see him, not because he was extraordinary by title, but because he was extraordinary by love. When the session ended, the children clapped, and his daughter ran up to hug him tightly. He bent down, holding her close, his eyes damp with tears. For once, he didn't feel invisible. For once, he felt like the world had seen what his daughter had always seen. That night, as they walked home, she looked up at him and said, "Papa, now everyone knows what I know." And he realized she was right. The light that had always been theirs alone was beginning to shine for others too. The weeks that followed were unlike anything the janitor had ever imagined for himself. The small session he had done at the school had touched more people than he realized. Parents spoke about it to each other in the community. Teachers mentioned how the children were still talking about the puzzle game with buttons days later. Some kids even began bringing bottle caps, stones, and scraps from home to see what other games they could invent. For the janitor, it was strange. He had spent his life blending into the background. Now, every time he walked through the school halls, someone would stop him to say thank you or ask him to explain a little trick again. He wasn't used to being noticed. At first, he felt shy and awkward, but slowly he began to accept it. His daughter, on the other hand, loved every second. She would proudly introduce him to her friends, whispering to them that her father could make learning feel like magic. At night, when they sat together at the small wooden table in their apartment, she asked him to show her new puzzles so she could try them before anyone else. One evening, she said, "Papa, do you think you'll do another lesson at school?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "If they want me to. I want you to," she said firmly. "Because when you do it, you're not just my teacher. You're everyone's teacher." Her words struck him deeply. He never thought of himself that way. But maybe she was right. The CEO had kept in touch. She came back a few more times, always quietly, never with cameras or reporters. She didn't want to make a show out of it. She only wanted to support him in ways that felt right. Each time she encouraged him to believe that his way of teaching could reach beyond just one classroom. At first, he didn't understand why she cared so much. She was a powerful woman with a busy life. Why spend time on someone like him? One day he asked her, "Why are you doing this for me?" He said. She looked at him with a calm expression. "Because I believe in planting seeds where others don't even see soil." "You've already planted one in your daughter. I think you can plant many more," he didn't reply. But that night he thought about her words while his daughter slept beside him. Maybe this was what his life had been building toward, even if he hadn't known it. Soon the school invited him to do another session. This time more children came. Some parents even stayed behind to watch. He showed them how to use string to make shapes and patterns, how to turn simple numbers into little games. The children clapped, laughed, and shouted answers eagerly. And every time he looked at his daughter's face shining with pride, he felt stronger. As word spread, other schools began to ask if he could visit. At first he wanted to refuse. After all, he was still the janitor with duties to do every day. But the principal, who had also come to admire him, arranged the schedule so he could manage both. Slowly, what started as one small moment grew into something bigger. One afternoon, the CEO invited him and his daughter to her office downtown. He had never stepped into a building like that before. The glass windows stretched high above the streets, and the lobby was filled with people in sharp suits moving quickly with files and laptops in hand. He felt out of place wearing his simple work clothes. But his daughter squeezed his hand and whispered, "Don't be nervous, Papa. They're just people." The CEO greeted them warmly and led them into a conference room. On the table were papers, books, and sketches. She explained her idea. "I want to help you create something we can share with schools across the country," she said. "Simple guides using your methods. Nothing expensive. Just lessons that parents and teachers can do with whatever they already have. I think children everywhere could benefit from this." The janitor sat in silence. He didn't know what to say. The thought of his small puzzles reaching children he had never met seemed impossible. "I'm not an educated man," he said finally. "I don't have the words or the knowledge to write books." The CEO smiled kindly. "That's why you won't be alone. We'll give you people who can help you put your ideas into words. What matters is that the ideas are yours. That spark can only come from you." His daughter looked at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Papa, imagine how many kids will play your games." He looked at her, then back at the CEO. Something inside him shifted. For so long he had thought of himself as invisible, as someone whose work ended when the floor shone clean. But here was a chance to give children more than a polished hallway. Here was a chance to give them tools to believe in themselves even when they had little. "I'll try," he said softly. From that moment, things began to move. With the CEO's support, he shared his ideas with a small team. They sat with him patiently, asking him to show his puzzles, his coin games, his cardboard shapes. He explained them the way he always explained to his daughter, in simple language, never complicated. The team wrote it down, drew pictures, and slowly built guides out of his words. Months later, a booklet was printed, filled with his methods. The title was simple, something even he could hardly believe: "Learning with What You Have." The school children were the first to use it. Then more schools joined. Soon teachers from faraway towns began to send letters, saying how their students loved the activities, how children who had struggled before now found joy in learning. Each time he read one of those letters, he felt something stir inside, a mixture of pride and disbelief. His little lessons, born at a small wooden table with scraps and coins, were traveling to places he had never seen. But through it all, he never stopped being the janitor. Every morning he still pushed his cart down the hallways, sweeping and polishing. Children would run past him calling out, "Sir, can you show us a new puzzle?" And he would laugh softly, promising to bring something next time. One evening after a long day, he sat with his daughter as the sun set outside their window. She rested her head on his shoulder and said, "Papa, do you know what I like best about all this?" "What's that?" he asked. "That you didn't change," she said. "Even when everyone claps for you now, you're still the same papa who makes puzzles out of buttons for me." Her words filled his heart with quiet joy. That was all he had ever wanted, to be enough for her, to give her something she could carry for life. The CEO, too, continued to support them, but she never tried to make it about fame or money. She simply wanted his light to reach as far as possible. In the end, his story wasn't about becoming rich or powerful. It was about something simpler, something stronger. A father who refused to let circumstances define what his daughter could learn. A little girl who believed in him enough to tell the world, and a moment of truth that showed everyone that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places. Years later, when his daughter had grown, she still carried his lessons with her. She still remembered the buttons, the coins, the cardboard shapes, and whenever anyone asked her who first taught her to think differently, she always smiled and said, "My father." Because in the end, that was the heart of the story. Not the recognition, not the booklets, not even the schools that learned from him. It was a bond between a father and a daughter, built on simple lessons shared with love. A bond that lit a spark, one small flame that spread farther than either of them had ever dreamed. And it all began with a little girl pointing proudly and saying, "My dad taught me,